Alessia stood at the altar, facing 500 guests. But instead of saying, "I do," she gave a secret signal to the AV tech. The vows were replaced by security footage of her fiancé and maid of honor, her own sister from the night before. Thanks for having me. To understand the ending, you have to understand the beginning, the perfect world I built before they burned it all down. For an Italian-American girl from a family where tradition runs deeper than marinara sauce, a wedding isn't just a party, it's a coronation. At 27, I had spent my entire life building toward this moment, this shimmering promise whispered by my Nonna over Sunday dinners, meticulously planned by my mother over countless cups of espresso, and dreamed of by me since I was old enough to understand what forever meant. This wasn't just any wedding. This was the asterisk wedding. The one our family, the proud and sprawling DeLuca clan, would talk about for generations. It was my masterpiece, the culmination of a lifetime of expectations and 18 months of obsessive, detail-oriented planning that had consumed every waking moment of my adult life. The venue was the Venetian, a palace of gilded opulence in New Jersey that screamed, "We've made it," to anyone within a 50-mile radius. 500 names were printed in elegant calligraphy on ivory cardstock, distant cousins from the old country, childhood friends, business associates, and every person who had ever mattered to our families. The 10-tier cake was an architectural marvel of buttercream and fondant sugar flowers, each layer representing a different region of Italy, costing more than my first car and requiring its own structural engineer. We had imported roses from Ecuador, hired a string quartet that had played at Carnegie Hall, and even arranged for my great-aunt to fly in from Sicily with her ancient family recipe for wedding cookies. Every detail was an extension of me, a testament to the life I was about to build. The blush-pink roses on every table matched the subtle undertones in my custom Vera Wang gown. The string quartet was instructed to play Vivaldi as guests arrived, honoring our heritage while the scent of gardenias, my Nonna's favorite, would fill the air. Even the pearl pins studding my classic auburn chignon were family heirlooms, each one carefully selected from my mother's jewelry box, tiny moons orbiting the perfect, structured bun that had taken 3 practice sessions to perfect. At the center of this masterpiece was Marco Rossi. He was the man my Nonna would have lit 1,000 votive candles for at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the answer to every prayer she'd whispered over her worn rosary beads. He was devastatingly handsome in that classic Italian way, olive skin, dark hair that curled just slightly at the nape of his neck, and a smile that could disarm a firing squad. His burgeoning career in finance made my father, a man notoriously impossible to impress, puff out his chest with pride at family gatherings. Marco had that rare combination of old-world charm and new-world ambition that made elderly aunts pinch his cheeks and business associates offer him cigars. He looked you directly in the eye when he spoke, his hand always finding the small of my back in crowded rooms, and he remembered every story my grandfather told about the family's immigration to America. He was charming, ambitious, and he loved me, or so I believed with the naive certainty of a woman who had never been betrayed by someone she trusted completely. His love was supposed to be the foundation upon which this entire, glorious monument was built. By my side, as always, was my sister Isabella, my maid of honor, my shadow, my supposed best friend. She was 2 years younger but had always been the vibrant, wild yin to my structured, responsible yang. Where I was meticulous, she was spontaneous. Where I saw the world in carefully laid plans and color-coordinated spreadsheets, she saw it as a series of beautiful, chaotic moments to be seized without thought of consequence. We were supposed to be 2 sides of the same coin, inseparable since childhood. She had been my protector on the playground, my confidant through heartbreaks, my fiercest defender when anyone dared to criticize my perfectionist tendencies. She was the first person I called when Marco proposed, her shriek of joy echoing my own across the phone line, and she had thrown herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that touched my heart. She was meant to be my rock on this, the most important day of my life. The first hairline crack in my perfect world appeared at the rehearsal dinner, like a spider web spreading across pristine glass. The private dining room at the Venetian buzzed with the happy chatter of our closest family and friends, the air thick with the scent of imported lilies and expensive Barolo wine. My father gave his booming, heartfelt toast about family honor and finding a good man. Marco's mother wept quietly into her linen napkin, overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. It was a perfect tableau of familial bliss, exactly as I had envisioned it during months of planning. But something was fundamentally wrong, like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. Marco, seated beside me at the head table, felt a million miles away despite his physical proximity. His hand rested on my knee, but it felt like a prop, his touch absent and mechanical. His smile, usually so broad and genuine that it crinkled the corners of his eyes, was a tight, stretched thing that never reached beyond his lips. He kept glancing at his phone, which lay face down on the ivory tablecloth, and the subtle tap-tap-tap of his fingers against his wine glass was the only outward sign of an agitation he was desperately trying to conceal. "Everything okay, honey?" I whispered, leaning in so close that my hair brushed his cheek and I could smell his expensive cologne. He startled as if pulled from a trance, his dark eyes focusing on me with visible effort. "Yeah, of course, Alessia. Just a last-minute thing with work. A deal that's supposed to close tomorrow. You know how it is." I did know. His ambition was one of the things I loved most about him, but tonight, the night before our wedding, it felt like a betrayal in itself. Then there was Isabella, and her behavior was even more unsettling. My typically spontaneous sister was a whirlwind of manic energy, almost frenzied in her attentiveness. She fluttered around me like a hummingbird on a sugar high, her movements sharp and jerky. "More champagne ale? Are you warm enough? Let me fix your hair. It's a little messed up in the back." Her laughter was just a decibel too loud, her eyes just a shade too bright, like someone performing the role of devoted maid of honor with an intensity that felt less like love and more like a desperate diversion. The moment that would haunt me happened as dinner was winding down, when the last of the tiramisu had been served and guests were settling into comfortable conversation. Marco stood up abruptly, patting his pockets with what seemed like genuine panic. "Damn it," he muttered, loud enough for our table to hear but not so loud as to disturb other conversations. "I can't find my phone anywhere. I must have left it in the bathroom or dropped it somewhere." Before I could even offer to help him search, Isabella shot up from her chair like she'd been launched from a catapult. "Oh no, I'll help you look for it, Marco," she announced, her voice ringing with manufactured concern that now, in retrospect, sounds absolutely ridiculous. "You stay here and enjoy dessert with your parents' ale. We'll find it and be right back." And just like that, they were gone. They slipped out of the dining room together, a united front on what should have been a simple mission to find a lost phone. At first, I thought nothing of it. Isabella had always been helpful to a fault, and Marco was practically family already. But 10 minutes stretched into 15, then 20, then 25. My aunt started asking where they'd gone. Uncle Tony made a joke about them probably getting lost in the massive venue. A small knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach, that primal intuition that something was deeply wrong even when your rational mind insists everything is fine. When they finally returned, the air around them crackled with a strange, invisible tension that I felt but couldn't name. They entered separately, a few calculated feet apart, as if they had consciously measured the distance between them. Marco's face was flushed, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, and he avoided my eyes completely, heading straight for the bar to pour himself a double whiskey. Isabella came back to the table with her practiced smile plastered back on, but her cheeks were rosy, her breathing was shallow, and there was something in her eyes, a guilt so profound it was almost tangible. "No luck," she said with an exaggerated shrug, her voice pitched just slightly too high. "It's probably in his coat back at the hotel. We'll get it sorted out tomorrow." I looked from her overly bright face to Marco's tense back at the bar, and the pieces didn't fit together like they should have. The anxiety in my gut was no longer a small knot. It was a cold, slithering snake coiling around my intestines. It was impossible. I lay in the pristine hotel suite, staring at the ceiling while the silk sheets felt like sandpaper against my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Marco and Isabella returning to that dining room played on an endless, torturous loop. The space between them, the flush on his neck, the guilt in her eyes. It was a discordant melody I couldn't silence, and the cold snake of anxiety in my stomach had now coiled around my heart, squeezing the air from my lungs with each beat. At 2:17 a.m., my mind desperate for any distraction from the growing dread, I remembered something that sent a jolt of pure panic through my system. My something old,
Nonna's rosary. It wasn't just any rosary. It was the one her own mother had carried down the aisle in a small Sicilian village over a century ago, the silver beads worn smooth from decades of desperate prayers, the crucifix heavy with the weight of family history and immigrant dreams. My Nonna had pressed it into my trembling hands just a week earlier, her own hands shaking with age and emotion. "For protection, my Alessia," she'd whispered in her heavily accented English. "And for luck, every DeLuca bride has carried this." In the chaos of leaving the rehearsal dinner, I'd forgotten it completely. It was tucked securely in the inner pocket of my wool coat, hanging in the venue's coat check room. I couldn't get married without it. I couldn't walk down that aisle without that tangible piece of my heritage, my strength, my family's blessing. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and found the 24-hour emergency contact for the Venetian. A sleepy but professional voice answered on the fourth ring. I explained my predicament, my voice tight with the kind of urgency that only a bride 12 hours before her wedding could understand. The night's security manager, a man named Frank, sighed wearily but agreed to meet me. "Give me 20 minutes, miss. I'll be at the side entrance." I threw on jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt, a reminder of my pre-Marco life, and drove through empty New Jersey streets with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Frank was waiting exactly where he'd promised. A kind-faced man in his late 50s with tired eyes and a rumpled uniform who looked like he'd seen every possible wedding emergency in his decades of service. Frank led me through silent, cavernous hallways that seemed to echo with the ghosts of 1,000 celebrations. The coat check room was a small, unassuming closet off the main foyer, and I quickly found my coat, my fingers closing around the familiar, cool weight of the rosary beads. Relief flooded through me, so potent it made me dizzy, until a thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through my gratitude. An impulse I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. I turned to Frank, who was waiting patiently by his security desk, probably wondering why this bride looked more terrified than relieved. "This is going to sound completely insane," I began, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. But I was trying to remember exactly what time I hung up my coat tonight, and I'm worried I might have left something else behind. Could we possibly check the camera footage from around 11 p.m.? Just for a quick second. Frank shrugged with the easy compliance of a man who'd handled stranger requests. "No problem. Helps pass the time anyway." He tapped a few keys on his computer, and a grainy, black-and-white image of the foyer flickered to life on his monitor. The timestamp in the corner read 22:58, and we watched as guests from our party milled about in their formal wear, laughing, hugging, saying their goodbyes in the elegant aftermath of our rehearsal dinner. And then I saw them, Marco and Isabella. They weren't looking for a phone. They were moving with purpose, with a furtive, secretive energy that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. They slipped away from the dwindling crowd, backing into the small, shadowed alcove right beside the coat check closet, a blind spot from the main room, but in perfect, damning view of the security camera. My breath caught in my throat as the world narrowed to that flickering screen. I watched my sister, my maid of honor, the girl who had taught me to braid my hair and held my hand during thunderstorms, reach up and push my fiancé against the wall with desperate hunger. I watched as his hands, the same hands that were supposed to place a ring on my finger in less than 10 hours, tangled themselves in her dark hair with the familiarity of lovers, not strangers. I watched them kiss with a passion that was devastating in its obviousness, a desperate, consuming kiss that told me this was not their first time, not even close. This was just the first time they'd been caught. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, Marco's hand found the handle of the coat check closet door, and they disappeared inside together into the darkness, where my grandmother's sacred rosary had been hanging, defiling the very space that held my family's most precious blessing. The world didn't just go silent, it felt like all the air had been vacuumed from the entire universe. In that sterile security office, under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, my masterpiece didn't just shatter. It was obliterated, incinerated, reduced to nothing but the sordid, flickering truth playing on that 9-inch monitor. For exactly 10 minutes, I was submerged in a tidal wave of grief so profound it felt like drowning. The shock, the pain, the sheer visceral betrayal, it was a physical agony that burned in my lungs and blurred my vision. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek, falling onto my clenched hands like a tiny, glistening monument to my broken heart. But then, something shifted. The wave receded, and in its place, something else began to crystallize. The fiery, liquid pain began to cool and harden into something diamond-sharp and utterly merciless. It was rage, yes, but a specific kind, a quiet, focused, and completely ruthless resolve. The weeping bride was gone. In her place stood an architect of justice. I wasn't canceling this wedding. Oh no, canceling was what they expected, what they probably hoped for. Canceling would mean tearful phone calls, whispered gossip, and pathetic, gaslighting apologies from them both. It would make me the victim, the jilted bride crying in her hotel suite while they controlled the narrative and probably found a way to blame me for driving them together. They wanted a show? They had performed for each other in the shadows of my most sacred day. Fine. I would give them a show, but it would be on my stage, under my lights, and for an audience of 500 people who would never, ever forget what they witnessed. My brown eyes, which were supposed to be soft with love and joy the next day, felt like they were forged from obsidian. I straightened my spine and turned to Frank, who was politely pretending to study a blank wall to give me privacy in my moment of devastation. When I spoke, my voice was unrecognizable, low, steady, and devoid of any emotion except chilling clarity. "I need a copy of that footage," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the monitor. From 11:07 to 11:25, unedited. Frank turned back, his expression a mixture of pity and something that looked almost like admiration. He could see the transformation, the shift from heartbreak to warfare. "You sure about this, kid?" I needed his help, so I gave him a story he could understand and support. "His family has money and lawyers," I said, the lie coming easily because it was rooted in truth. "If I just call off the wedding, they'll make it messy, claim I'm unstable or a gold digger. But evidence like this, it's grounds for a clean annulment, no questions asked." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his tired eyes. This wasn't about revenge, this was about a young woman protecting herself. "Okay," he said, his voice firm with newfound respect. "Let me get you that file." Frank handed me a small black USB drive that felt heavier than a brick in my palm. "Good luck, kid," he said, his calloused hand closing over mine for a moment. "Give him hell." "I will," I promised, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. The drive back to the hotel was different. The fog of anxiety and confusion was gone, replaced by laser-like focus and crystalline clarity. I wasn't just driving, I was mapping out a battle plan with military precision. My next call, made from the car at nearly 3 a.m., was to Tony, the eager young AV technician I'd worked with on the reception slideshow. "Tony, hi, it's Alessia DeLuca," I said, forcing my voice to sound light and excited rather than coldly furious. "I am so sorry to call this late, but I just had the most amazing last-minute idea." "No problem at all, Ms. DeLuca. What can I do for you?" "I want to surprise Marco with something really special," I said, the name tasting like poison in my mouth. "I put together a little video tribute, just a short clip of our relationship. Is there any way you could load it onto the main system and have it ready to play on the big screen behind the altar? I want to surprise him during my vows." "During the ceremony? In the actual church?" he asked, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "That's definitely different, but yeah, totally doable. The projector system is already installed for the reception montage later. Just get me the file and I'll have it ready to go. Even better, I have it right here on a USB drive. It's already edited and ready. I'll drop it off at the front desk for you within the hour. Just watch for my signal tomorrow. I'll give you a little nod when I'm ready to play it." "You got it, Ms. DeLuca. A surprise video tribute during the vows. That's so romantic. He's going to be blown away." "Oh, he has absolutely no idea what's coming," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile as I hung up the phone. The trap was set with surgical precision. The bait was perfectly positioned. The performers had no idea the script had been completely rewritten, the stage reset, and the finale was going to be a horror show of their own making. I walked back into my hotel suite carrying Nonna's rosary in one hand and the USB drive in the other, one representing the sacred trust they had desecrated, the other representing the instrument of their very public judgment. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could actually sleep. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and cloudless, a perfect October day that mocked the storm raging inside my chest. My suite transformed into a bustling hub of feminine energy. Hairstylists, makeup artists, bridesmaids, and my mother all swirling around me in a cloud of hairspray, nervous laughter, and champagne-fueled excitement. I sat serene and still in the center of the beautiful chaos, a marble statue of a bride, performing the role of my lifetime. Isabella was my shadow, her performance as the devoted sister reaching its absolute zenith. She was breathtaking in her blush-pink bridesmaid dress, the color now seeming like the cruelest possible joke, flitting around me like an anxious butterfly, offering mimosas I didn't touch, fluffing my train with reverent hands, and telling me repeatedly how beautiful I looked. Every touch felt like a brand, every word of affection like a shard of glass sliding under my skin. "I honestly can't believe this day is finally here," she sighed, her eyes glistening with what anyone else would have mistaken for tears of joy. "I'm so incredibly happy for you, Ale. You deserve every bit of this happiness. You deserve the perfect life." The hypocrisy was so profound, so breathtakingly audacious, it was almost artistic in its cruelty. I just smiled, a placid, serene smile I had practiced in the mirror until it felt natural. It was a smile that didn't reach my brown eyes, which remained cold and watchful, counting down the minutes until justice. The most surreal moment came just before we left for the church. The photographer was capturing the final touches, my mother weeping softly in the corner, overcome with emotion and pride, while I stood before a full-length mirror like a vision in white satin and imported lace. Isabella approached me from behind, her movements gentle and reverent as she made tiny adjustments to my cathedral-length veil, letting the gossamer fabric fall perfectly around my shoulders like a cloud. She leaned in close, her face inches from mine in the reflection, her breath warm against my ear as she secured the last pearl pin into my auburn chignon with the tenderness of a loving sister. Then she whispered the words that will be seared into my memory until the day I die. "He's all yours now, sis. Forever and always." A jolt of pure, white-hot fury shot through me like lightning. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. She thought she was giving him to me, a used gift she was magnanimously passing along after taking what she wanted. She thought she had gotten away with it completely. She was fixing my veil to present me to the man she had been screwing behind my back. I met her eyes in the mirror, and for just a split second, I let the mask slip. I let her see the Arctic coldness in my gaze, the promise of what was coming. She flinched slightly, confusion flickering across her face, but then dismissed it as pre-wedding nerves. I smiled again, and the performance continued. Walking down the aisle on my father's proud arm was an out-of-body experience, like watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. The organ swelled, playing the traditional bridal march I had chosen 18 months ago when I still believed in fairy tales. Through the delicate French lace of my veil, I saw 500 faces turned toward me in rapt attention. I saw my beloved Nonna in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her weathered hands trembling with emotion. I saw my parents' faces glowing with a pride so pure and genuine it almost shattered my resolve. I saw Marco's parents beaming at their son, probably calculating grandchildren in their heads. All these people, family, friends, colleagues, distant relatives who had traveled from 3 different countries, gathered to witness what they believed would be a sacred vow of love and lifelong commitment. They were about to witness something far more memorable. And then I saw him, Marco. Standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored Armani tuxedo, looking impossibly handsome and completely confident. His face was a mask of smug satisfaction, the expression of a man who believed he had successfully pulled off the con of the century. He had his beautiful, respectable, wealthy bride walking toward him, and he'd had his fun on the side with her sister. He thought he had won the lottery, thought he could have his cake and eat it too. When he caught my eye through the veil, he gave me that dazzling, confident smile, the smile of a man who believed himself untouchable, invincible, clever enough to fool everyone forever. My father placed my hand in Marco's with ceremonial gravity. His skin was warm, his grip firm and possessive. I felt absolutely nothing. It was like shaking hands with a pleasant stranger I was about to destroy. As I stepped onto the altar, I quickly scanned the sanctuary. The massive projector screen, originally intended for a romantic photo montage at the reception, hung retracted but ready above us like a sleeping giant. In the back of the church, near the sound booth, I spotted Tony giving me a subtle thumbs up. Everything was in place. The audience was seated and expectant. The actors were in their positions, completely unaware of their roles in the tragedy about to unfold. The curtain was about to rise on the performance of a lifetime. We stood before Father Martinez, a gentle man who had baptized both Isabella and me, while the scent of incense and imported gardenias hung heavy in the cathedral air. The church was so silent you could hear the whisper of my veil in the draught from the stained glass windows. Father Martinez smiled at us with genuine warmth, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent joining couples in holy matrimony. He guided us through the opening prayers, his words about love, fidelity, and the sacred bond of marriage washing over me like water off stone. I felt detached, as if watching a movie of someone else's life unfold. Marco was the picture of a devoted groom, his eyes fixed on me with what looked like pure adoration, his performance absolutely flawless. Isabella stood just to my left, holding my bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, radiating smug satisfaction like heat from a fire. She thought this was her victory, too, the final scene in her long-running performance of sibling rivalry, where she proved she could take anything she wanted, even my husband-to-be, and I would never be the wiser. The moment arrived like the tolling of a bell. Father Martinez turned his kind smile toward me, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "And now, Alessia, would you like to share your vows with Marco?" This was it, the climax, the crescendo. Every eye in the cathedral was on me, 500 people holding their breath in anticipation. Marco's face was soft with expectation, ready to receive my heartfelt promises of eternal love and devotion. I took a slow, deliberate breath and stepped forward, gently taking the microphone from its stand. The movement was commanding, deliberate, completely off script. A confused murmur rippled through the pews like wind through wheat. "I do have something to share," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous space. There was no tremor, no hint of tears, just cold, hard certainty that cut through the air like a blade. But instead of vows, I paused, letting the anticipation build to an almost unbearable tension. "I think I'd rather show everyone a short film I produced last night." The murmur grew louder, confusion turning to bewilderment. I saw my mother's brow furrow in concern. I saw Marco's confident smile begin to falter, replaced by the first flicker of genuine confusion. And I saw Isabella's painted smile start to twitch at the corners, her intuition finally catching up to the reality of what was about to happen. I lifted my chin and locked eyes with Tony at the back of the church. I gave him one sharp, definitive nod, and then I detonated the bomb. The giant screen behind the altar hummed to life, descending smoothly like the curtain rising on the final act. It flickered once, twice, and then the image appeared in stark, undeniable black and white. It wasn't a romantic montage of our courtship. It wasn't childhood photos or engagement pictures. It was grainy security footage, and every person in that cathedral could read the timestamp, 23:07. The location tag, Venetian Foyer Cam 4. The image was devastating in its clarity. The alcove by the coat check. The desperate, hungry kiss between my sister and my fiancé. Isabella's hands clawing at Marco's back like she was drowning. Marco's hands tangled in her hair with the expertise of long practice. The unmistakable moment when he pulled open the closet door and they tumbled inside together, into the very space where my grandmother's sacred rosary had been hanging. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room, 500 people simultaneously realizing they weren't at a wedding anymore. They were at an execution. The gasp was followed by a moment of horrified silence, so complete you could have heard a pin drop, and then the dam broke. Angry whispers rose like a tide, voices escalating as the full magnitude of what they were witnessing sank in. I didn't watch the screen. I had seen enough. Instead, I watched them. I watched my father, a man of immense pride and old-world honor, rise halfway out of his pew, his face turning purple with rage, his knuckles white as he gripped the wooden back of the seat in front of him. I watched my mother's face crumple in shame and disbelief, her hands flying to cover her mouth as if she could somehow take back what everyone had seen. I watched Marco's face drain of all color, going from healthy tan to a sickly, greenish-white. He looked like he might vomit right there on the altar steps. But the best part, the moment of pure, unadulterated vindication that I will treasure for the rest of my life, was watching Isabella's face. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her expertly applied blush standing out like war paint on a ghost. Her mouth fell open in a silent scream of horror. She was exposed, stripped bare in front of everyone we had ever known, revealed as the villain in a blush-pink bridesmaid dress. Her carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation had just been demolished by 60 seconds of grainy, black and white truth. I let the footage play for a full, excruciating minute and 15 seconds. I wanted them to feel every frame of it. I wanted the image burned into the retinas of every person in that sacred space. I wanted there to be no doubt, no room for excuses or gaslighting or creative explanations. When I felt the point had been made with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, I gave Tony another small signal. The screen went mercifully black. The house lights came up slightly, illuminating the tableau of shock, horror, and barely contained fury spread across the pews. I turned back to face my audience, and that's what they were now, an audience rather than wedding guests, my posture perfect, my shoulders back like a queen addressing her court. I raised the microphone to my lips one final time. As you can all clearly see, I announced, my voice carrying the calm authority of a judge delivering a verdict, this wedding is canceled. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Then I turned my head slowly, deliberately, first to Marco, who stood frozen beside me like a deer in headlights, his eyes wide with panic and the dawning realization that his life as he knew it was over. I will not be marrying this man, I declared, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. Then I turned to Isabella, my sister, my former best friend, who was now shaking so violently that the bouquet trembled in her hands. And I will no longer be acknowledging this woman as my sister. The finality of those words was absolute. I hadn't just canceled a wedding, I had performed a public excommunication, banishing them both from my life in the most spectacular way imaginable. For my final act, I let my hand fall to my side and simply dropped the microphone. The thud as it hit the plush carpet echoed through the silent cathedral like a gunshot, a period at the end of the most important sentence I would ever speak. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or collapse or beg for explanations. Instead, I turned with the grace of a queen, my long satin train sweeping behind me like a cape, and began to walk. I walked back down that endless aisle alone, my head held high, looking straight ahead past the shocked faces and gaping mouths. I didn't need their pity. I had earned their respect. As I passed my family's pew, I heard my father's voice rise above the chaos, no longer the controlled growl of barely contained rage, but a full-throated roar of paternal fury. "Marco," he bellowed, and I heard the sound of him pushing past other guests, probably ready to commit murder with his bare hands. I didn't look back. Their mess was theirs to clean up. I reached the massive oak doors of the cathedral and pushed them open with both hands. Bright October sunshine flooded over me like a blessing, and I took my first breath of free air in 24 hours. Behind me, 500 guests were probably heading to the reception anyway. The bar was open, the 10-tier cake was waiting, and I had just given them the most unforgettable story of their lives. They weren't celebrating a wedding anymore. They were attending the wake of a lie and the birth of my liberation, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Alessia, thank you. Your story is the ultimate masterclass in taking back power. It teaches us that the greatest justice isn't just canceling the show. It's rewriting the script, recasting the villains, and making them perform their final, humiliating scene in front of a live audience. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.